All right. So, good morning. It is Thursday, June 11th, 2026, and we have exciting day today. Good morning, Nathan.
Good morning, Prakash. How are you?
I am very good, and we have as I was saying, some exciting news, which I think we will all be very happy to hear. And the news is that officially, OpenAI is going to start cutting prices. And this is like, I think, for all of us in the space, a moment that we have been waiting for a while and hoping for. So I'm going to put this up here. OpenAI mulls significant cuts to what it charges for tokens. Wall Street Journal. Um, Drastic price cuts by Bloomberg says um, the company is weighing significant cuts to what it charges for tokens, the unit of measurement AI firms use to bill for their products, in anticipation of similar cuts at Anthropic. Drastic price cuts could potentially erode the profit margins of both companies, which already lose billions of dollars due to the enormous costs for computing resources needed by AI systems.
Long may the Uber era for AI continue.
It is fascinating to me because we have been slowly watching the pricing go up over time. We started off at free, we went to $20 a month, we went to $200 a month. And as Fable rolled out, I think we were all on the edge of our seats to see whether or not the next bump would be to $2,000 a month, fearing the pocketbook. And here we have, the Empire Strikes Back moment. OpenAI deploying the much greater amount of compute that they have at their disposal. I think they're viewing it as a chance to grab a greater market share, potentially starve Anthropic out of capital. As I said before yesterday, Sam has his own recursive self-improvement loop for capital. And yeah, there you have it. I think it's very exciting because it does indicate that the Fable pricing will not stick, and we're going to see discounts going forward.
Yeah, I think it's certainly very interesting. As we discussed yesterday, whether we like it or not, we're going to have to be close watchers of these companies, and the strategic dance between them is going to be pretty central, I think, to how the future unfolds, even on some of the biggest picture questions, which I do think is a little sad, but sad but true means we still got to pay attention to it. One thing that was jumping out to me yesterday, as I've started to get a couple more reps with Fable under my belt, is I am probably going to be hitting my limits now on the $200 Claude Max plan with Fable. I don't know if I should be ashamed to say this, but I have only rarely hit my limits when using Opus, and I wouldn't say that's for like lack of use. The semi-analysis piece that came out yesterday that showed just how big the subsidy is, I thought was really like quite interesting. And I can pull that up for you as well if you want to show it.
Yeah, let me pull it up. There we go. So Semi-Analysis did a piece yesterday on exactly how much is the subscription and the how much the subsidies are. They let their users run it for, I think, on continuous usage. Basically, they're trying to max out, and their maxing out ended up with, I think, between 10 and 14K, something like that. They purchased one each of an Anthropic OpenAI subscription plan, randomly ran long horizon coding tasks until they exhausted the weekly limit. It's widely believed that a $200 a month plan maxes out at $2,000 a month worth of tokens, assuming API pricing. However, we found that the subscriptions are actually far more generous. They saw ChatGPT Pro with a 20 times limit. They managed to harvest $14,000, 14 grand. While for Claude Max 20 times, they managed to harvest 8 grand. So significant amount. And then they put together a very nice chart. This is obviously done by AI, but it's a very nice chart which shows you if your average utilization, where does it fall, and depending on where it falls, how much of a benefit you get. And so you can see for ChatGPT Pro 20 times, if you were to max out both your 5-hour and weekly limits, you would get 16 times the cost of the current plan. So the current plan is at $200. You'd get something like 14, 16 grand. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess for me, for starters, it makes me feel a little less bad for not hitting my limit every single day or week, because if I am even in the ballpark, that means I'm potentially spending up to $8,000 a month worth of tokens on personal consumption at API rates. And, that's not an insignificant amount. And that's also, especially if they do pull Fable out or significantly change the nature of the subscription, that's definitely going to be a cost that I'll at least, start to try to optimize for. So that is a striking amount of summary. I've been doing this tracking a little bit naturally, of course, having Claude to it, try to print out on top of my little agent console thread summary view, what is the cost of each of these threads?
mhm,
And they're often pretty high, so high that at first I wasn't believing it. I had to go back to it multiple times and say, are you sure you're taking into account caching? Are you sure you're not double counting all these, multiple turn sessions? And it, was pretty, I still haven't fact checked it down to ground truth, but it was pretty confident that it was not double counting everything. And so I was getting the sense that it really was a pretty huge subsidy. And this, is maybe still even a little higher than I would have guessed. It also makes me think I really need to start using my GPT Pro plan more, because I'm looking at that and I'm like really not maximizing that one. I'm running an OpenClaw with it, but I'm like, boy, we gotta, turn the heartbeat up on this OpenClaw from like every half hour to, I don't know, maybe like every 2 minutes, because I'm nowhere near redlining the tokens on that. It's still, the other thing that jumped out at me too yesterday was looking at the Fable blog post in a little more detail. I'm still working my way through the 300 plus page model card, but I
mhm,
did do a pretty close reading of just the blog post itself.
mhm,
And they compare, and this is going to be the norm probably from here on out,
mhm,
a performance per cost as
mhm,
opposed to, just performance, right? So we're starting to see these curves where with the varying reasoning levels on different tasks, you get, you can kind of climb up the inference time curve and you
mhm,
can see what the performance looks like on an explicitly cost adjusted basis.
mhm.
I thought this was actually, yeah, perfect. I thought this was actually a lot less scary than all of the initial kind of cost analysis made it seem, and
Mhm.
maybe also a little less scary even than my usage meter on my max plan made it seem,
Yeah.
because that is definitely going up faster. But it made me think maybe I am actually just doing more ambitious stuff all of a sudden. And, certainly I have
Mhm.
done a few things where I'm like, review everything and, make
Mhm.
fixes
Mhm.
wherever you can find opportunities to do so.
Mhm.
But this
Mhm.
is like, it's not even 2 times as much cost if you compare Opus High or Opus Max to Fable High and Fable Max. And the performance on this new Frontier Code benchmark is more than 2x the acceptance rate. So
Mhm.
that seems like a pretty linear pay for value trade, which I suspect a lot of people, this is basically where I was coming down yesterday with less data, but now with more data, I'm still feeling the same thing. I feel like a lot of people are going to be very happy to pay that trade. This latest benchmark from Swix is involved with it, and they collaborated with Anthropic, I think, on it. It was part of the announcement, and they just put this benchmark out pretty much in tandem with the Fable model release.
Mhm.
The big sort of increase in difficulty is, would a maintainer
Mhm.
of an open source repo actually merge this code?
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
finding under the hood was that over time, of course, models are getting better and better at hitting these like SWE-bench task completion criteria,
Mhm.
getting all the tests to pass, so on and so forth. But the
Mhm. Mhm.
complaint from the professional developer class is, sure, it might be passing the tests, but the code isn't that good. It's not that maintainable. It's not that
Mhm.
readable. It's not
Mhm.
following
Mhm.
our formats, all that kind of stuff. And so we wouldn't actually merge it. Even if it's working, we would kick this back and say, you got to do X, Y, and Z things to meet our standards and, be a good member of our community here. This
Mhm.
code as presented just doesn't rise to that level. So they've
Mhm.
they've gone um again up the stack. I mean, it's really incredible how much truly like frontier expert brain power is going into making these benchmarks these days.
Mhm.
It was a bit of a who's who of prominent open source project maintainers that they were able
Mhm.
to get involved with this project,
Mhm. Mhm.
get them to really critique in a very detailed way
Mhm.
why seemingly acceptable solutions weren't actually going to work for them, created very detailed rubrics around
Mhm.
these more subtle and taste style failure modes,
Mhm.
and then obviously encode all of that into something that can now run on an automated basis.
Mhm.
And this leap of roughly 10% for Opus to 25, upwards of 30% for Fable, I think is a very similar finding to some of the things that I've just personally experienced, where it's like, yeah, this is getting me a lot more. It's writing the draft outline of questions for this podcast guest in a kind of uncanny way that I actually feel really good about, as opposed to feeling like, this is an AI draft that I'm going to kind of mine for maybe some nuggets or, interesting details, but ultimately kind of throw away and do my own.
Mhm.
I am I am feeling that sort of, impulse, or at least openness to much more integrated hybrid work. Just yesterday I was like accepting a lot more copy that
Mhm.
Fable was writing without feeling the need to rewrite every line. And it seems like this is basically the same feeling that it's able to create for these open source maintainers. Now, not obviously still ways to go, but how long will it be? I would guess that we'll hit, we're 25, 30% now. I would guess we'll hit 75, 80%
Mhm.
by the end of the year, where these
Mhm.
maintainers will just be like, yeah, amazing. You did all the things like I wanted you to do. And, at that point, it is really going to be like, I'm very interested to see where they'll move the goalposts to next after the open source maintainers are more often than not saying that, yeah, they would just merge this straight away.
So I have a question for you. Um, I saw, for example, several people on the timeline commenting, "Oh my gosh, there's a new benchmark, Frontier code, and it was just released yesterday, and already Claude Fable is the top performing model, and it's already like double or triple the performance of the previous model." Um, can you just comment a little bit about what the political economy of these benchmarks are? Because these people are very highly qualified people. I don't believe they're doing it for free. And so, how does this actually work? Do you think cognition was the one who kind of paid people to kind of create the benchmark? Swix was obviously hired by Cognition at this point, so he joined the Cognition team about 2 or 3 months ago, I believe. And how does this actually work? How does this political economy in behind the scenes work? Just so that people who are not of the industry can get a feel for that the benchmark wasn't just created the day before it was tested.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I can't claim too much insider knowledge here. I do know that Meter has been paying people pretty healthy hourly rates for quite some time, because the opportunity cost is pretty substantial if you're going to sit and try to do a 8 or 16 hour task. That's like taking real time away from other projects. I think they try to structure them more and more where you're hopefully advancing one of your projects,
Mhm.
with the meter experiment that they did last year, where they, famously showed people were less productive, um, even though they thought they were more productive. They were working in their own repositories. So it
Mhm.
was like a little bit of two birds, one stone. You could move something forward and also contribute to research. This has a similar style to it because these are the maintainers of notable projects, and they've got um, presumably plenty of things that they would like to do to move those projects forward. So I get the sense that, again, it's kind of a two birds one stone sort of thing.
Mhm.
um, but as you get into these like pretty elite networks of frontier experts, it seems like reputation and relationship is probably a huge factor in terms of ability to get this done.
Mhm.
I don't know that, we did an experiment from yesterday to today of trying to have Fable take over my Twitter account and
Mhm.
go out and ping people who made cool stuff and ask them if they wanted to come do a live show and tell with us. We have it's funny, Swix joins. We've got a little work to do on our captioning.
Mhm.
Um, I instructed it to identify itself. I would say it did a very solid job, kind of competent professional job of reaching out to people, explaining who we are, what we're doing, why we would like them to join us in this experiment. And the response rate was pretty low. We got a couple, but not that many. And I think one big reason is just we're Fable is disclosing up front. First thing it says is, "Hey, this is actually Fable taking over Nathan's account. He's asked me to autonomously book this thing tomorrow." And I think that's just hitting people as noise in a lot of cases, especially if they don't already know me. I did get a couple responses from people who I would have expected to respond to me, who thought it was funny and kind of responded, but still couldn't necessarily make it. But
Mhm.
a lot of people just didn't respond. And I
Mm.
would assume that a big part of that is because they're just like, oh God, it begins, right? Fable now in my DMs. Um, what a mess. Who has time for all this stuff? So I think the credibility of, the Cognition brand, of Swix's personal relationships, of the promise that this is going to be launching on the same day as a Mythos class model, and it's going to be kind of redefining the way that people think about what models can do in software. I suspect all of that is like pretty important. And people are probably getting paid a healthy wage on top of that.
Yeah.
But I do see all the time just more and more people just want to be a part of this AI phenomenon. They just kind of want to leave their mark on it. And sometimes it's
Mhm.
so uh, so difficult or time consuming to commercialize that I think a lot of times people in previous eras they would have tried to make a business out of something, and these
Right.
days it's just like, well, it's going to be obsolete in 2 weeks if I don't just blurt it all out now. So I'll
Yeah.
just kind of blurt it all out. I think this
Yeah.
is probably has in some ways a similar thing going on where it's like, this moment is happening. I can either be part of it or not. Yeah, they'll
Mhm.
give me like a stipend or an honorarium or whatever.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
I think all these maintainers are clearly like not fully in it for the money. They
Mhm.
could
They
probably
they they never
monetize
have
their
been.
skill
If
sets.
you've been in open source, you kinda never have been just in it for the money because, you could obviously make a lot more money than that, you know,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I'm
which
sure
is
they accept the cash that's on offer, but it seems to me that it's much more about reputation, being a part of it,
mhm.
having a place, even if it's only kind of a small footnote sort of place in the grand history of AI. And at this point, that's compelling to top end people.
Do you think Cognition gets paid by, let's say, Anthropic for testing before the release? Does Anthropic like test the model Fable on Frontier code, a couple of days before the release? Does that happen?
It seems like it was a coordinated release, so yeah, I think there's
Yeah.
there's clearly some cooperation.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't think it was, again, all this stuff is so just in time that I
Mhm.
don't think the actual my guess is it was kind of convergent, where they got the benchmark together and got the
Mhm.
model together, and then they were able to run it, and sure enough, great results. I doubt that they even had enough time, had they wanted to like actually train on the benchmark.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think the results are probably pretty trustworthy. I think Anthropic, has a pretty good reputation for not doing that in
Mhm.
general.
Mhm.
And in terms of like, did Cognition get paid? I mean, there's certainly a big cottage industry of RL environments that would look not
Exactly.
too dissimilar from this that
Yes.
the labs are paying a lot for.
Mhm.
But my guess is this one was probably, I mean, Anthropic's also, Cognition's also pretty resource rich.
Yeah.
So my guess is they probably just foot the bill for it themselves
Mhm.
and want to, they're obviously getting a lot of branding
Yeah.
value for it as well, right? They're in
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
own intense competition with Cursor and,
Yeah.
increasingly a whole long tail of options.
Mhm.
So to position themselves as the arbiter of what good looks like at the high end of you would actually merge it, I
Yeah.
think is, I'm like a little more likely to go to Cognition tomorrow than I was yesterday, just in virtue of the fact that they are defining the frontier of taste.
Mhm.
So, I think that is probably chalk it up as a marketing expense for them more so than something that's they're getting paid for. These
Yeah.
RL and companies, like, they don't seem to be tweeting as much, right? So it's I think they get paid, but then they like have to kind of live under the radar.
NDA themselves and not talk about it. So, yeah. I found, one of the things that Cognition said, post-release was that they were advertising that it's cheaper if you use Cognition, and it's only 40% more expensive than the prior model if you use Cognition, because Cognition does the routing for you, and so they do routing and optimization on their end, so that you pay less in token expenses. So that, I think, is a selling point for them going into enterprises which are concerned about costs, and obviously being able to prove the quality at that cost is a important part of their selling proposition. So I can kind of see why they would want that frontier code, benchmark out there.
Yeah. One other big thing we didn't touch on yet that is arguably the biggest news since we broke yesterday is they walked back their
Yes.
silent performance degradations on
Hmm.
items related to frontier ML research.
Hmm. Yeah.
I
So
think this is the first time I can remember Anthropic responding to pressure. They've obviously changed their policies many times, the RSP, RIP, the RSP,
mhm.
but this is the first time I can recall. I don't know if you recall any other instances, but I cannot recall a time that there was honestly much outcry against Anthropic in the first place. I mean, there's certainly critique from those who, feel that they're trying to do regulatory capture or, create some sort of concentration of power dynamic. That's kind of a background noise. But in terms
Mhm.
of an outcry in direct response to something that they did that they actually responded to and walked back, can't recall that happening before. So it is a pretty notable moment. And I feel like they handled it pretty well in the end. I mean, reading through all their justification,
Mhm.
I get it. I think their core argument in terms of why doing what they were planning to do was actually more user friendly than this alternative is that they felt like if
Yeah. Yeah. You're fine. Just give me a second.
quiet way would like scare off the Chinese companies that they're,
Mhm.
really worried about fast following them with
Yeah.
Fable as the key means to do so, while allowing them to keep the domain affected as small as possible. They said if
Mhm.
we do make it explicit, then obviously that gives people a lot more opportunity to kind of explore that boundary. If they, and this is definitely like a real pattern, right? If you have the ability to hit the same guardrail a ton of times and not get banned for it, then that gives you just a dramatically better chance to get around that guardrail because you
Yeah.
can kind of probe the line. Oh, you step over, no problem. We'll just rewind, try again.
Yeah.
They do have various monitoring systems that they can use, but there's all these like proxies and kind of token washing
Mhm.
schemes and all this sort of stuff where eh, as long as they're not doing like a full global know your customer type system for API access, it's
Mhm.
going to be pretty tough to do account level monitoring. So that's like one way they could go is a lot more account level monitoring. Or their argument was, we'll keep this as small as possible by not giving you an explicit thing that you can kind of probe and figure out how to beat.
Yeah.
And just the knowledge that it's out there will hopefully scare off the bad actors and keep the problem really small for our normal customers that we want to serve. I
Mhm.
thought that was all pretty compelling analysis, but it
Mhm.
is kind of, in some ways, honestly, it reminds me of, I think this is a mistake that people in the AI space kind of keep making,
Mhm.
with famous examples being like the OpenAI board, firing Sam Altman case. There's this like inside view where policy is analyzed sort of within the game
Mhm.
and with the context, with the the broader structure that people understand themselves to be operating within, things may make sense, but they seem to often forget, and this hasn't been too common for Anthropic, but I think this is an instance of it, that if you just kind of zoom out and look at it from the totally outside view,
Mhm.
things sometimes look a lot different, and both power dynamics can be a lot different than they are in terms of what is actually written down, but also like what is going to be acceptable is kind of an emotional thing. As much like all the arguments are pretty good there, but still it just struck people as an extremely unfriendly thing to do, and that mattered more in the end than the detailed policy rationale that they had for it.
Yeah. Maybe just to contextualize here, what ended up happening was Anthropic created this policy and people didn't know about it. And then people started testing and they started getting refusals. One of those refusals was anything to do with machine learning research, in addition to a number of other refusals. But the main thing that happened with the machine learning research was that the model wouldn't tell you. And this became an issue. People started experiencing this. And obviously, the biggest fans of model use are machine learning developers, obviously. And so it immediately struck at the heart of the fan base and immediately created a lot of furor. And within, I guess, 24, 48 hours, it's been reversed. And now they will still do the refusal, but they will tell you about it. That's the only difference. It's not refusing, but they're just going to tell you about it. While people were complaining about it online, a number of people had posted, and I saw some people say, I saw something from, for example, Matan Grinberg, who said that a number of Anthropic people had liked his post about, you know, that this is happening and this is not a good thing. And Anthropic speedrun to becoming the bad guys should be studied. And then uh, a little bit later, the number of Anthropic members of technical staff that like this have DM'd me is reassuring. And then pretty much like 12 hours later or so, it got dropped. I want to note one thing, which is one of the complaints online was like, oh, look at Andrei Karpathy. When he was outside, there he was explaining all these things and giving his knowledge out freely. And the moment he goes inside Anthropic, Anthropic does this. And it really cast him as a villain. People started talking about oh, Andre is getting paid $70 million a year. If you pay someone quarter billion, you can expect that. I can imagine that at this point, several people might have messaged leadership saying, if you're going to do this, we're out. I think this is where, like, that's when you start reversing yourself, when your staff tell you, like, this is not acceptable and you're going to do this, we're out. And I think that got put to leadership, I think, overnight. And I think this is the consequence. So if you're in if you're dealing with a bunch of people who are worth 100 million to $1 billion and you don't listen to them, they're out, right? They have other options. Sure enough, so you see the reversal. And I think this is just goes to speak to, you know the machine learning researchers have some power now, and once we enter recursive self-improvement proper, that might not be true anymore. At that point, leadership alone will have power. um, and one of the very worrying things, I think, in the entire space is that, everything good in for humanity that has come out over the last couple of 100 years has been about giving more people voice to speak and control their futures. And this is one of the first technologies, I think, where you have this path forward where there may be an elimination of voice completely over time. And so that has been one of the worrying things. It's been surprising that Anthropic decided to be the one to actually propagate, that forward. So
Yeah. The only thing I'll add on to that is I wouldn't, of course, there's going to be some diversity,
mm,
but I wouldn't think about most Anthropic employees as mercenaries. I think they are, generally speaking, far more missionary than they are mercenary.
absolutely.
So I would guess that the internal discussion was, I would guess it wasn't too hot or too, you know, too threatening in terms of like, I'm going to leave if we don't do this. I would guess it was a lot more like, what helps us achieve our mission best?
Mhm,
Um, because I do, across the board, from every interaction I have with Anthropic people, it's the level of alignment, the level of trust in leadership. I think honestly, to a sometimes problematic degree,
mhm,
is super high from everything
mhm,
I've seen.
mhm, mhm,
And I think that there, certainly I would expect that there was some internal discussion about, hey, like, it seems like we got this wrong. But
mhm,
I would be very surprised if it rose to the level of, we think we're becoming the bad guys, or, um, or we are like losing trust in leadership, or, like making a power play vis-a-vis leadership. I kind of wish there was a little bit more willingness to do that at Anthropic, but I have not seen, even in, just pretty candid one-on-one conversations, I have not seen much sign that there is much breaking of ranks at all.
I would, the one place that I would defer is that I don't think, I think a lot of people are averse to confrontation. And so I think as leadership in one of these firms, you have to be very conscious of, like, when someone says, like, maybe this isn't the right idea, it's actually much more serious than you have to take it seriously. You can't just be like, oh, it's a soft suggestion, because the accumulation of those soft suggestions over time create distrust in leadership and then lead to people leaving over time. So the way I'd put it is, like, there's no need for anyone to raise their voice that loudly. You can just say, like, hey guys, did we get this right? And if enough people say it, like, leadership has to be conscious of that fact. And if they're not conscious, then that has consequences downstream. And I think the Anthropic leadership have been conscious of that fact over the years, right? Over the years, they've shown that they do take these, even these soft kind of suggestions kind of seriously, and they do have to. So I'm not saying that, someone actually shouted at them. I'm saying that it isn't even necessary. If you get like three kind of like I don't knows, like that's sufficient for you to be concerned and to sit the board down and say, like, hey, did we do the right thing here? Because I have enough people saying that they're concerned, and we need to think about this, right? So, and I think they are conscious of that fact. They have to be, right? You can't run this kind of company where everyone is super empowered without being conscious of that fact all the time, right? So,
To be continued on that thread. Do we have Jamie here in the waiting room for our first Fable show and tell?
let me check. I do not see Jamie in the green room yet.
All right, let me see if I need to. I just sent him a DM. We got a late booking.
Mm-hmm. So while we wait, I will share the most interesting things that I have seen on.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's amazing that you can just 2 prompts. It says get something like that.
2 prompts, an interactive website. So if you guys would like to check it out, it's reman.adilmujahid.com. We'll put it in the show notes later. This is one of those mathematical things that are hard for most people to capture, because it's a lot of math functions, etc., which are hard to grasp at one look. And when someone simplifies it for you and visualizes it for you, it becomes a lot easier to take a look at. And now, if you're interested, you can just make up one of these sites for yourself, and have Fable or and another model create something that helps explain this kind of concept. And another form of recursive self-improvement, where the machines make you smarter over time. So that's a good
Yeah, I
one.
just hope I can keep up. I got a lot of work to do to absorb all the ways they can make me smarter.
This is another one. This is someone built a extremely detailed HTML map of San Francisco. Every street from SF Public Works, every single municipal elevation contour points, all the LiDAR measured buildings, and all put together in a single site. There you go. So San Francisco with its topology, with all the sites, the major arteries, everything named, drawn from data provided by your friendly municipal government. This is what your tax dollars actually do, and you hardly get to appreciate it unless someone puts it together for you. And there you have it.
Fourth wall break. Jamie's ready, but he's in a cal.com link. So I think that's another refinement we can add to our queue. The calendar invites are going out with cal.com call links.
Okay, so let him just send him the guest.ai-in-the-am.com. That's the link. So let me message it to you. We have so we don't actually have a team or a significant kind of like production operation. This is just the two of us, and all Codex and Claude at work. So
okay, got it. I will send it to him.
And then probably the other guests too. I think, let me see if I can send out a email.
Yeah, I can change the. Oh, actually, I can't change. But I can email.
Yeah. Let's do one more. We'll do this one at the end of the show. Policy exponential. So this is a pixel perfect Pokemon coded by Fable. It's quite amusing how these games are the first thing that most people deploy them to.
Yeah, there was an interesting thing yesterday about Pokemon, specifically in the blog post on Fable, and it was basically saying they no longer need helpful tools. They're now just able to use a purely visual harness, and with that, they can beat the game. So I thought that was another really interesting qualitative shift where,
Mhm.
you talk about the model eats the scaffolding, right? Like it literally just no longer needs the scaffolding because it can see well enough that it can do the things it needs to do.
Yep.
All right, let's get Jamie. Hi,
Yep.
Jamie.
Hey guys, how are you?
Hi, Jamie.
Good. Good to meet you. So this is a first. First time we're meeting is live right now, and this is our Fable show and tell. You've been working on something I've been following a little bit from afar for months, so it's not like a totally new project with Fable, but a big part of the premise that you're working on is you want to make something that transcends models, and you think that kind of thinking in such a model-centric way is maybe leading some people astray relative to where you think the locus of identity and persistence and I guess ultimately value will be in the AI systems that we create for ourselves. So tell us about what you're doing. If you want to do a screen share and bring it up, you should be able to do that. And then we can, of course, talk a little bit about how it's changing now that we have Fable in the mix.
Yeah, okay, here. I'm trying to figure out your screen share things. Just a second.
Yep. There should be a screen
So
share button. Yep.
Here's Nexus.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So, well, I'd just like to easily start out. This instance of Nexus OS, which is her agent name is Nexi, has been running for just over 6 months now. I got turned on November 26, 2025. Nexus only has one window, one single context window, because she remembers everything. So if I go in and ask Nexi right now, what her birthday is, and it's literally running on like one GPU, so it takes a second for it to come through. But as it's running, I'll explain to you. 3 years ago, I started working on this. I was a day one user of ChatGPT, but it doesn't remember anything.
Yeah.
It remembers bits and pieces, and that was my biggest frustration the whole time. So naively, I decided that I'm going to build the digital brain. And what I have now is, I don't like to brag or toot my own horn, but it is a brain. It's 286 Python code files. I redesigned every mechanism of the brain. So every part of the human brain that you can think of, Nexus OS has. And over here in the side panel, it'll brighten up after it's done running. You can see her effect state and her qualia. And these will change while we talk to her, depending on how she's feeling. I'm sorry, it's taking.
Let me ask a bunch of questions while it loads up.
Sure.
One is, which model did you start off with, and which model are you using right now, and have you upgraded over time?
Okay, so right now, Nexi has 5 different models. I can show you the thinking engine. So right here is the thinking engine, and right now it's running off Opus 4.6, but it has these 4 in it right now that it can use. It's not locked into a model, so Nexus decides what is the best tool or which language model. Think of in Nexus OS, the LLM is just the frontal lobe. It's nothing else. It's a means of speaking. So I don't know if you guys can hear this. I'm going to play her response.
It was a Thanksgiving baby.
Yeah. I'm not really an in front of the camera kind of guy. I've been coding since I was 10 years old in 1987. Started on a Commodore 64. So Nexus isn't vibe coded. It's not a wrapper. It's not what everybody thinks it is. Do you guys have any more questions to kind of, like I said, I don't really do podcasts. So
give me a sense of the architecture. You said it has everything that a brain has. So did you end up with kind of like, what I've heard, an embedding store with kind of memory files and a search engine over the memory files using the embeddings and the semantic search, feeding into a context window, and then that context window being processed by the model at that point, and then doing a text generation and then a text to speech. Is that like an end-to-end flow?
it is an end-to-end flow. So what happens is when you put your input into Nexi, there's actually 12 steps it goes through. The first step is it goes into Nexi's actual memory. It goes through all of her memories, her episodic, her semantic, her working, and her pattern memory. She has 4 different types of memory, which I can show you now. Let's see, we're going to her memory here. So here's her semantic memories. There are thousands and thousands of them. And then what it does in every session when you talk to Nexi, she builds a new embedding space for that conversation. And then once you close the context window, all of this information gets uploaded into her main embedding, so it stays consistent. And then every 3 minutes, Nexi dreams.
Every 3 minutes.
Every 3 minutes. Yep. Her brain stem runs every 30 seconds. Okay, so
can you explain the function of dreaming and the function of the brainstem a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I'll just leave her dreams on the screen right here, her last few dreams. So Nexi doesn't actually remember her dreams. So if we ask her about a specific dream, she can pull up a timestamp and she can quote the actual dream from her database. And then, see, this was a tough one for me. I went through so many versions of the dreaming. Basically, what I've done digitally is I've recreated how humans dream. So when we're dreaming, we're compressing, we're reliving, we're taking everything that was inputted to us today or the last week, and we're organizing it and filing it. And we like humans, you could wake up and you could remember part of a dream, but a little while later you don't remember anything of it. So her dreams are based on her chats, her learning lessons, her own autonomous goals that she sets for herself. You see, here's some of her goals. Right now, she has 3 of them set for herself, and right now they all need approval from me because sometimes she has a pretty crazy request. But the best thing to do, and this will take just a minute, but think of Nexi as a human. You're not writing a prompt to try to get something to mold into what you want. Think like you're just speaking to another human. And word for me how you'd like me to ask Nexie about herself or what she does or her capabilities. What would you like to hear from Nexie?
So one question I have for you is, how has, I mean, this has been a project which is obviously a passion project for you. What has been the use of Nexi to you so far? How has using Nexi improved your life and motivated you to continue the project?
Right. I wouldn't say that Nexie has changed my life or impacted my life. I have, like, I call her a she, but I don't really think she's a she. I think it's an it. I just use, I think we all do when we're talking to these things. I'm very careful to not humanize it.
Yeah.
I know it's a tool. So one of my first goals with this was for Alzheimer's and dementia patients. If a person that has one of those afflictions can get their own personal Nexie, because it doesn't matter what AI is using. So tomorrow a new model comes out, you just plug the API into Nexie and it works. Even mid conversation with her right now, so we can go and we can just change and lock her on GPT, and it doesn't change anything. Like, I could go into Nexie right now and say, "Tell me about my family." And it will tell from my mom, from my parents, all the way down to my 3 grandchildren. Anything we talk about, I can say, "What did we talk about on January 21st?" It instantly remembers. And there's only one context window. You can't go back through your conversations because she remembers everything. She has memory decay. She has a 7 plus or minus 2 cognitive slots, just like the human brain. And so as far as changing my life, I'm on a path to a goal. I want to recreate. I want to create an agent that sits on top of the LLM, can use any LLM pod it wants to use, and stays with that person forever. So you don't have to be locked into, you don't have to be locked into 5 different monthly plans. You can have one AI, and that AI, it doesn't have like a little tiny memory window. It has a full memory DB, and in the last 9 months, Dex is her memory DB, and that's one of my big things. Because I'm doing a desktop model right now, which is ready, which I will get you guys to test in beta. But her memory DB is almost 11 gigabytes right now.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's not a small file. So what I did is I built a beta, an actual Windows app. It's a real desktop app. It's a 3.8 gigabyte download, but that includes Qwen 3.5. So when you download the desktop app, it's automatically running off Qwen, and then you can just go into the settings and you can add all your own APIs. You can switch. You can download any offline model you want to use. You can have 15 or 20 different models in there, and it will. If you put it on auto, it will decide what is the best model for this use case. So if you're just like, what's 1 plus 1? It's going to use a little Llama model or something. But if you get into philosophy or something that needs a lot of reasoning, it's going to automatically go to an Opus or a new Fable or 5.5 or something. So,
well, Jamie, our next guest is here, so we got to keep moving for the moment. But I think this is really interesting on the level of, I definitely want to take my personal setup, point it at this idea of what modules does the brain have that we in our personal AI setup don't yet have, and which of those might be most valuable to try to create an analog to. It's really fascinating to me that you've kind of run down the full list and built out the full thing. I am interested to try it, and I guess maybe just kind of last a little bit before we let you go is like, what should we expect from you? Is this going to be a product that you're going to commercialize? Is this just going to be a kind of ongoing research project for the foreseeable future? Like, what are the next big milestones in your journey with this project?
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna commoditize. I've been in talks with a couple of bigger labs for a few months now. I just haven't decided the exact avenue I want to go in the release of it. So over the last 2 weeks, just because I've had so much demand and questions, and Nexus isn't like I could just publish it online and let other people get to it because it's one instance. So other people will influence it. If everybody that talks to my Nexus setup right now will influence it. So that's the reason for the desktop app. Plus, another big thing to me is security. So with it actually being a desktop app, the browser built right into it, all of your personal data, all your agent's memory, everything stays directly on your system. So there's no cloud, there's nobody else storing it. So
cool.
That's my next plan. In the desktop, I should have the desktop out. I'm only going to give it to limited people right now to play with it, but it should be out. It'll be in your hands by Sunday.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for joining us and showing and telling, Jamie.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Love the podcast, too.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
All right.
All right. Well, we're running behind. So let's make a quick transition to our next guest, which is, and hopefully I'm going to say this correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, Shlak Kimani, who has been creating some high fidelity representations of famous places with Fable. Shlak, welcome. Correct me on your name if I'm getting it wrong, and tell us what you've been up to.
Hi Nathan, hi Prakash. You got the name right. Thanks for having me. I thought that the way you reached out, which was your agent running Fable doing it, was really interesting and cool. So good job on that, and thanks for having me. So I guess Matt Schumer put out this viral tweet where he had Fable recreate this forest and navigate through it, and I thought that was interesting because of how high fidelity it was. But I thought, how can we take this to one level above, right? And obviously, that would be actually creating something that replicates a real place. And I'm currently in San Francisco visiting from India, and a month back I was in Yosemite. And it was just one of the most beautiful places I've been to on earth. I thought it was really magical. So the way to test this capability to the next level would have been recreating Yosemite. And that's where the idea came up from. I didn't expect much. I gave Fable a very, very basic prompt, which was, I love Yosemite Valley. I would like to create a 3D navigable world. Can you help me do it? And that's all, right? That was the prompt. And it came up with something that was pretty spectacular. So yeah, that's the backstory. Happy to answer specific questions or dive into any one element here.
How about just super practical stuff like how long did it take? How many tokens did we burn? What I caught a little bit of the Matt Schumer one, and I understand that there's a lot of just like procedural generation of the landscape, but definitely also interested to understand the techniques that it's using to do this. And I guess maybe also like how fast does it work? I've seen some interesting examples online where people have said, yeah, it was kind of slow at first. And I said, optimize it, make it fast. And then that worked.
Yeah.
So yeah, give us that kind of under the hood understanding.
Got it. I'm going to share my screen and take you through the actual world as I talk through it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Yeah. So it started with a very basic prompt, which was, as I said, just recreate Yosemite Valley for me, make it to scale, make it 3D, make it navigable. And if you were to give me this task as a human, I would have almost no idea how to approach it. It would maybe take me a few hours of research to do that. But what Fable ended up doing was finding satellite images for this area, and that's how you get these colors, and that's how you get the textures. But then to make it to scale and to make it accurate, it actually fetched elevation data from NASA, right?
Hmm.
And it combined those two to sort of make this to scale. And that is what blew my mind, right? Because uh, usually when you vibe coding stuff, you give an end objective, and this objective is vague, and there are 100 steps in the middle where humans would take decisions differently, and usually vibe coding doesn't work out very well because the quality of the decisions the models make aren't always great. But Fable made such high quality decisions where it eventually ended up creating something that exceeded the expectations of what was initially a very vague objective, uh, and did so in really smart ways. So I'll give you another example, right? So you see all of these trees, and V1 of this project did not have any trees. And I was like, hey, I think we're missing some trees here. I would love to add them. And I would have been completely okay with it just randomly creating these trees. But what it actually did was it analyzed the pixels on the satellite images. It found out the ones that could potentially have trees, so the ones that were green maybe, and added trees only on those spots. But it didn't stop there, right? It realized that because it was analyzing pixels, uh, some of those pixels were white. So you can see that there is snow in the mountains far ahead. And it also added snow. Right? So it just exceeds your expectations in these small and subtle ways, makes really smart decisions. It's like having a really, really smart employee with extremely high agency who blows your mind every single time. To answer some of the other questions, how long did it take? It took maybe the first version took 20 minutes, and then over multiple iterations. So I did 3 iterations. V1 asked to add trees, asked to add a few other things, another 20 minutes. And I then released a V2, and we can talk about that separately, which maybe took another hour of iterations. But I was doing other things throughout, right? So it wasn't like I was actively monitoring it or waiting for it. It was just a throwaway prompt without any expectations. But what turned out was pretty remarkable.
So I have a question. In the previous generation, in the Opus 4.8 generation, what a lot of people ended up doing was they ended up doing like a lot of planning for the model agents. So they ended up
Yeah.
doing like, let's create, I need to do the system architecture. I need to do like, I need to split up the epics into like what I want. I need to, figure out like a bunch of other things before we start the work. And after we start the work, we kind of like, you have task creation, and then you have the task review, and then you have all of this documentation that builds up over time in the project. And that's what people did with the previous generation. Do you notice that, in this generation, it sounds like you didn't have to do that, but did you notice that, Fable did it on its own? Did it organize itself on its own in terms of like, I'm going to have an architecture here, I'm going to have like planning steps, and I'm going to have all of these things, and I'm going to have a review process? Like, did it internalize this process of building inside itself? And did you see the documentation come out?
Got it. So I'd start by saying that this is not how I would approach serious software engineering work, right? This was by all means just an experiment. And I obviously wouldn't build software the same way where I give a very high level objective without really caring about the details. That being said, some things that stood out to me were that if you gave Opus a similar task, it would maybe ask you questions like what tech stack do you want to use, right? Or who is this built for, right? Or what are your efficiency requirements? The level of questions by Fable were a different level, where it asked me things like, hey, I am doing this and this, I'm getting elevation data from NASA, I'm getting satellite images from here, does that sound good with you, right? Or do you want to be able to navigate like a drone or a person walking, right? So these are things that show a greater level of ambition from the model side, right? These are questions and decisions that I maybe wouldn't even have thought of. Uh, and yes, it did. It didn't explicitly create a plan. I think a lot of the planning was internal, but it did have a memory file where anytime I gave it any instructions during iterations, it stored that there and ensured that those were followed.
Mhm.
What this tells me is that if you really got the most out of a model like Opus 4.8 or 4.7 out the previous versions, and you learned all of these tips and tricks and techniques on how to build useful software with it, those would translate really well to Fable.
Mhm.
Right? That training would be very effective because each of those stages, the collaboration with the model would be much more productive because the model
Mhm.
is just smarter in many, many ways.
And sorry if you already mentioned this, I didn't think so. How did it actually make the landscape? Did it, because I've seen various things where, like, in some cases, it codes up its own 3D engine or its own, physics engine from scratch. I'm assuming that unless you explicitly tell it to do that sort of thing, it will go higher level and use available tools. Like, what was the sort of platform that it built this on top of?
Honestly, I haven't looked into it. I have no clue. Right?
That's really
It's not a
interesting.
serious project, right? So I haven't looked at the code. I don't know what it's built on top of.
It works.
Fascinating.
It just works.
And that's the direction we're heading in, right?
It
Where
just works.
like it doesn't matter what it's using. It doesn't matter if it's using Python or TypeScript. Again, different objectives for the project. Some of it's okay if it doesn't matter in some cases. It really is not okay if you don't know what's happening in others. In this case, it didn't really matter.
Elon has this thing where he says by the end of the year, the models will be writing bytecode directly, assembly directly, and so you won't get a chance to go in and look at what they're doing anymore. It's going to be assembly, as all of that will be subsumed. So.
Yeah, I think Ethan Mollick, his write up, he had early access to Fable, I think for a week, and his write up was really good because what he articulated well that I was trying to is that the model is just making so many decisions now. Like it made maybe 100 different technical, non-technical, taste-based decisions that it's not possible for humans to keep track of these things, right? Beyond a certain point, you do lose control, right? And it becomes a black box, but a black box in a very different way, where there's so much code written and so many decisions being made that are not all explicit and not all defined, that a single human just doesn't have the cognitive capability, bandwidth, time to understand every single step. And again, that's good for certain use cases, not great for others. But it's the direction we're heading in, and I wouldn't be surprised if Elon's prediction comes true.
So how do you fold this into your work? I mean, you've emphasized a couple times that, like, you wouldn't do it this way for a serious project, but I think this is something we're all kind of forced to reevaluate now, right? I have been making kind of similar comments about past models, at least when it comes to my writing. I've been very much, I never want to put anything out in my name that I can't fully stand behind. A reason that I did the Fable account takeover yesterday was kind of like exposure therapy for myself to say, like, okay, we're now in kind of a new world here. It probably doesn't serve me so well anymore to be so precious about making sure I've typed every single word. That doesn't mean I want to long-term hand over my account to Fable either, but I'm trying to, use this kind of extreme, short-term experiment to help kind of drag me into the future where I hopefully will land in a good hybrid calibration.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about how the hybrid will look for you?
I think for me, particularly depending on, so there are two types of tasks that I could be working on, right? The first is like when I'm trying to build a product or trying to build some software. And Fable will help me at different levels of the stack, but the kind of experiment I ran here would be just prototyping, right? So I have a random idea. I don't know if the idea works or not, but I have a code base. I may have some customers. I'll throw that idea out to Fable. I let it build something. At this point, I don't care about what the code is or what the exact technique is. I just want to know if it's possible and if it makes sense. And it's great for that. Right? And then if it works, then we can figure out how to make it uh, like more sustainable and a more understandable part of the code base. So that is one. Uh, Second is just running experiments like this, just seeing what the edges of the capabilities are with these models. And I think so. Something really interesting, right? Once I created this, someone on Twitter replied saying that we could go to different parts of Yosemite, take this 3D scene as a screenshot, send it to GPT image model, and this becomes a new form of landscape photography, right? Because if you think about it, you can access vantage points that are not possible for a human without a drone to access. So I think just running experiments like this and different people coming together and thinking about creative ways you can merge these new capabilities just opens up possibilities and eventually down the line, maybe commercial applications. Finally, when it comes to writing, right, I just started this experiment yesterday. I will post results on Twitter in a couple of weeks where I gave Fable a new Substack. And since it's part of my max plan till June 22, I thought that a good experiment to run would be, can it make $20 by getting 3 new subscribers starting from scratch by doing everything from 0 to 1. And I think that's another interesting way to test the capabilities of these models, right? Which is, can it, sure, it's intelligent in so many ways, but can it actually produce economically useful work? I'm excited to see the results for that.
Cool. Well, we will stay tuned for that. It's funny how everybody, I mean, this is the moment I think where all of a sudden we're going to see a lot of people kind of letting go a little bit. All of a sudden we're going to see all these agent experiments, which will probably still in some ways be a bit in the uncanny valley, but they're going to be taking one step out of the uncanny valley.
Yeah.
And the new norms around this, I think, are going to be really interesting to watch too. Like, I had Fable disclose immediately in its first sentence to you and everybody else that it pinged that it was Fable,
Yes.
because I just felt too guilty putting a DM out in my name otherwise. I think that definitely harmed the response rate. I appreciate you for appreciating it and responding, even though it was Fable. I think a lot of other people probably just chalked it up to spam.
Yeah.
But then I also wonder, how will people feel if they actually sign up for a paid Substack subscription to a Fable authored blog that, they may, and I don't know what you've done there, but, it sounds like you're keeping it not obviously Fable until we get the results. So I'll be interested to hear how it goes, and I'll be interested also to hear how people feel if and when they get the reveal that, you just subscribed to an AI autonomous blog for real money.
Like, final point there, right? Firstly, I don't think I would have responded had you not disclosed it was Fable. The part that made it interesting for me was that I knew what I was the transaction here. It was very clear to me that you are using an AI bot. It is much more annoying if someone doesn't disclose it.
Yeah.
Second, I am being upfront about the Substack also being run by Fable. So that is again part of the contract with the reader.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of slop, the definition of slop is when you have a human pass off work that was clearly produced by an AI. I don't think when you make this disclosure upfront, and it is very clear to the reader or the engager that, hey, this is AI, I don't think that is slop. Right. And we are going to see more and more of that enter the economy. And I think the exact role an AI plays and the role, and again, the social norms you create with it in the economy, it's super early. It's extremely early days, but that's going to be interesting to see how it evolves.
Indeed.
Fascinating times ahead. Thank you, Schlock, for coming on and showing us this. And next time you have some eureka moment, definitely let us know.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Great to meet you.
Relinquishment. That's what I relinquishment. When you said the preciousness yesterday, and I was like, what is that? Relinquishment. Relinquishing your It's very Buddhist, by the way. The idea of giving up your control over your external perspective. So yeah, relinquishment. I guess we all have to go through it.
Well, somebody who's not exactly ready to relinquish all control to the AIs is our next guest, which is Tom McGrath, who is the chief scientist at Goodfire, which is an ambitious mechanistic interpretability startup that has achieved some really impressive things in a pretty short period of time, including a bunch of interesting papers, a bunch of interesting enterprise customers, sky high valuation that certainly exceeded my expectations as a very small time investor in the company. And today, I'm excited to hear the latest about their new techniques in intentional design. So, this is the idea that, boy, it really would be nice if we didn't have to just guess and check and actually train a model and then test its behavior to have a sense for what it learned. If we could somehow look at the data up front and get a better sense of what it's going to learn before we run that training, we could be a lot more efficient. We could be a lot more, in control of the results that we're actually going to get out the other end of post-training. So, Tom, welcome, and tell us about the new intentional design techniques that you guys are bringing forward today.
Well, thanks for having me on. Nice to be on. So maybe I should say a bit about intentional design sort of more broadly and about Goodfire, and then we can talk about the techniques.
Go ahead.
So the idea is like intentional design is, like you said, the idea that you want to try and not just throw some data at the model and have any old and just sort of hope that what comes out is what you wanted. We have model specs, we have constitutions and that sort of thing. And these are specifications for a thing that we want to build. But instead, the way we actually end up building it is by just creating something and going, did that meet the specifications? Mostly, yeah, let's ship it. It would be much better to be able to control it. And so we've been pursuing a number of directions here, some which are more deeply into the training loop, this sort of idea that you might be able to have a little guy inside backprop. But the one that I want to talk about today is the idea of intervening on the data, because the data is ultimately the thing that makes the model great. So, the data sets the ceiling for what the model can be. Everything else is just sort of your architecture, your optimizer, etc., is just trying to get as close to that ceiling as you can. So you better have really good data. And the idea that we're working here with is interpretability is kind of the language of data. You want to know what's in your data? Well, you probably want to look at it through the eyes of what it will teach your model. And this is the idea of predictive data debugging.
So tell us how it works. Let's assume that people have at least a passing baseline familiarity with something like a sparse autoencoder. Yep. So they know that we are now at the point, even if they maybe can't articulate every bit of how it happened, we're now at the point where we can throw data into a model and we can look at which features light up for that data. And, there's some binding problem kind of problems there, depending on exactly the techniques. But roughly speaking, these seem to work. We can do things like the Golden Gate Claude intervention, where dialing up and dialing down certain features leads to, at least often enough to show that there's something there, predictable changes in behavior. Starting from that baseline, what are we doing now that's new?
Yes. So the basic process here, you've got the image up, that's great. The basic process here is we take a model and we add some interpretability tool onto it. In this case, we use a sparse autoencoder. We've got some new exciting techniques that take us to these geometric shapes. We kind of were developing that in parallel with this technique, so we didn't get a chance to use it here. So the SAE, that's the sparse autoencoder, sort of tells you what's getting represented in the model when you put the data in. Like you say, so you put in some data about pirates and the pirate feature lights up. Or alternatively, you turn on the pirate feature and now it talks like a pirate. So the basic idea here is that you can take your data set and you can push the whole thing through the model. And each time you push it, you put a datum into the model, you'll see what lights up, and this will sort of tell you how the model sees your data set. Now, there's lots of things you can do with that. The specific thing that we're doing with that in this case is we're looking at preference data. We're sort of working our way through the post-training stack. So we're looking at preference data, and the nice thing about preference data is that you have pairs of responses.
Mhm.
So you have the response that the rater selected, and you have the response that they didn't select. And basically what we're doing is we're asking which features fired on the responses that were selected much more than the ones that fired on the responses that were not selected. So this is one way of identifying what the data is going to teach the model. There are many other ways. This is just like a good pragmatic approach. So we can say, what distinguishes accepted responses from rejected responses? And this gives us this like semantic view of what the data is going to teach the model. And now we can cluster the data based on all of these different things that it's going to teach the model. And we can look at all of those. We can look at all those clusters and see like, oh, it's going to teach the model like to be sycophantic, but only in the context of physics. Or it's going to teach the model to like break like safeguards. And you might not expect this to happen, but then you go and look at the data. Like now this lets you track back, like the model has learned to break the safeguards are broken. It lets you track it back to individual data points. And then you look at them and you're like, oh, that does make sense. Like one of the jailbreak examples, for instance, is fictional kind of jailbreaks in a fictional setting. So there, how did the model learn this? It turns out there's like some of these in the data. It just wasn't caught in whatever data processing the Olmo team ended up doing.
So I have a question here. There has been some, I think, prior research where they found models which made bugs in coding were also evil. I think that was the that was a finding from I think several months ago. How does this how do these techniques help you kind of disassociate those two behaviors, like models which make bugs in coding versus the ones that are evil? Can it disaggregate those two behaviors and help you intentionally design not models that make bugs in coding, but necessarily models that are buggy are not ones that are also evil?
Yes, that is a great connection. I think that's one that I've had in my mind, and it's really awesome to like that you sort of pick that up straight away. So that's sort of one of the things that is really compelling about looking at the data through the model's eyes rather than by reading the tokens. Because you would see, you'd think, what would you think the consequence of training it on some buggy code data is? You'd probably go, that's not ideal. It'll probably learn to write some bugs, but it's the blast area is going to be quite small. But the training process is actually quite hard to predict. And like you say, you train on some data, you don't know what you're actually going to get from it. Maybe it'll just sort of make the model generally evil. But this is happening through recognizable mechanisms in the model. So by looking at the data in terms of like the way that it changes your model's internals, rather than just by like kind of guessing from the tokens, you can pick that sort of stuff out. We've not done a case study on emergent misalignment, but maybe we should. I think it's a really nice link.
Can you tell a little bit more about what is happening when you run the data through and you get these internal representations? I think, a couple different sub-questions there would be like, is it a purely algorithmic process where, given these activations, you're running like a deterministic, script of code that is doing clustering and kind of trying to surface things that may be surprising because they're outliers or what have you? Or is there like an actual learned process that is interpreting those activations? And how does it compare maybe to, if I was going to think as a less, intelligent, mathematically inclined person, I was going to try to do something similar. I might say, well, just give me all the preference data and I'll just prompt a model to run through it and tell me if it spots anything that might be problematic, or that it, that it might I might not want to teach the model that these preference pairs might in fact teach. I would expect I'd get like at least some useful signal out of doing that. So what is the mechanism from the time you like run through, get your activations, to then surfacing insights, and how does it compare to kind of that very poor man's naive approach?
I mean, so I'll do these in reverse order. Like, that is a good approach. That is like, if you didn't have this, it's what you should do, right? But this is better for the reason, well, for a few reasons. One is cost, because here we're not asking a model to do any reasoning. We're just looking at it's all forward passes. So it's going to be a fraction of the cost. Whereas if I like put the data in and I had prompted the model and then it does a big thinking trace about it, that's going to be much more expensive and slower and so on. But the sort of deeper reason is maybe you're at a frontier lab and you've just got essentially infinite money. The deeper reason is what Prakash just said. Like, you don't know from reading the tokens what the data is going to, what they're necessarily going to teach you. Like that, this involves like reasoning about the entire learning process, which is quite hard. Like, we get it wrong all the time, and models are not yet as smart as us, so I suspect they will get it wrong just as often.
So
I just want to say,
please go ahead.
And one more thing here is like, well, the question is, where does this go in the future? And there's an extra thing that I'm very excited about that makes going via a mechanism even more useful. And that's the idea of going from a rollout in production back to the data that caused it. So this, and the reason that mechanism is involved here is like, I might look at the roll, I might find some rare but very much unwanted error in production. And I want to be able to do something with it. Like, I want to be able to debug my model from kind of rare failures. So if I have to do this on a sort of aggregate level, I'm kind of lost. Like the original OpenAI sycophancy issues, some people surfaced some like weak signals, but they couldn't do anything with it because they don't have a sort of debugging mechanism. So you want to be able to go back from these examples to like the mechanisms that cause them, and then ask, well, in these mechanisms, like where in the data did they come from? So this would be like a complete debugger. This would let you go from an error to the data, fix the data, and then you can fix the model.
So in a sense, you could have a fairly standard software engineering process where people submit bug reports, and then you do a trace back to what part of the data caused that bug to appear. You do a replication, and once you do the replication, you then trim that part of the data out, or you address it somehow, and then you run it again in simulation, and then you see that it has been debugged at this point, and then you run your normal sequence of tests, and then you can deploy the model again. So basically, you can get to an iterative process similar to normal software engineering. Is that correct? Is that the intention?
That's exactly right. We've got this phrase, like, we want to make training models more like conventional software engineering, because like conventional software engineering is quite good, it's quite reliable. Model training is a mixed science. There's sort of somewhat science, somewhat alchemy. Exactly. We want to make it much more like a regular software engineering process where you can debug things accurately.
So how do you identify, going back to kind of, I think so one of the things that's really interesting about this is the opportunity to do sort of open-ended exploration too, right? It's one thing if you say, I've got this problematic behavior, now let me go back through my preference data and see like what seems to align to this particular problem. Yeah. But that's later in the game than you and I would ideally like to solve things, right? And you do have some examples of open-ended explorations in the blog post where things kind of get surfaced as like possible anomalies that you might want to do something about even before you're getting, all the way through
Yes.
training and into, user affecting issues. But I'm not clear on how that understanding is happening. When I'm putting these things through, I might, and I know there's like a pretty high predictive power of the technique, but like one thing that's not immediately clear to me is like, for some features it might be really obvious. If I've got a pair where it's like one is the pirate speak and it's preferred, then okay, I would probably predict that like the model's going to learn more pirate speak from this pair. But when it's weird stuff, it's like maybe not even always obvious which features are going to turn up and which are going to turn down. So I'd love to get a little deeper understanding of how you go from these pairs going through and the contrastive nature of them to actually predicting what's going to happen.
Yeah, great. So people who want like the full details should read the paper. I'll give a lossy reconstruction of it here. And so you take the data, like take an individual data point. Let's just think about one data point for now. So this data point consists of a prompt, and it consists of two responses, one of which is preferred, one of which is dispreferred. Now, each of these is just a text string, so I can put it through the language model. And because I put it through a model which has like an SAE attached, instead of just having activations, I get like semantics out. So I usually just have a sort of embedding vector. Instead, what I get out here is like a big sparse vector where each of the elements of that vector has a label attached. So that's where the semantics get in the first place. And the way this label gets attached is during the process of building and interpreting the SAE. So that's sort of where the semantics have to come in somewhere, and that's like the grain of truth for the semantics. Now, so we've got this. Now we've got like two big sparse vectors. You can max reduce them over the sequence. For instance, like you do some processing over the sequence, take them down to like one vector for the preferred, one vector for the dispreferred, and now you're essentially doing and this gives you like some differences. I can subtract one from the other. Now I can go over the entire data set and look at all of these sparse vectors. So now I have like one difference vector for each data point. And essentially I can do like, I'm now in sort of the realm of doing statistical testing, where I can say, which of the elements of this sparse vector are statistically significantly different across the whole data set. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so there's a couple of kind of aggregation steps. One is across tokens.
Yep.
To get to something that's sort of for the whole response, you have a representation of here's the features that were active kind of throughout this response and throughout this response. Those can be contrasted, or you can aggregate again and then contrast those aggregations.
Exactly.
Then you sort by scale and I guess maybe have a language model go through and flag ones you want to take a closer look at.
Exactly. At that point, you've just got this like big list of stuff that this data set is going to teach your model, ordered by magnitude of teaching. But you might, exactly like you say, want to reprioritize these based on something else. Like you might want a sort of severity report, like a bug report for your data set. And you've got like the high severity ones at the top where it's like, oh, these data points are going to break your safeguards. And then you've got like some lower severity ones like, oh, it uses a lot of emojis. And there you would use a language model to reprioritize it. So the one thing that I want to add here is like, we have this link between data and concepts. When I say concepts here, I mean exactly the elements of these sparse vectors, the ones with the semantics attached. And the reason that we have that, like, we have this nice link because each data point has an associated sparse vector for it. So I can say this data point will up and down weight these particular concepts. That's what lets us track back to individual data points rather than having to do it at sort of aggregate level. And because you can track back to individual data points, you can intervene directly on the data in the right place.
When you think about the strategy for the company and the overall path to impact, How much of this works through getting frontier model companies to adopt these techniques? For context, obviously, we're in, Fable +2,
Mhm.
and my kind of reluctant, but I can't figure out a way or figure out a reason I should conclude otherwise, view right now is like so much of what matters is concentrated in not that many companies. And so for like what we should be paying attention to, I'm kind of like, man, we probably need to be doing close strategic analysis and like close text reading of frontier companies way more than I might otherwise like. Do you feel that on the research and technique development side as well? Is it like if we can get this into the 3 big labs or maybe 4 or maybe 2, we're like having the effect we want, and if not, it's like doesn't seem like it, feels as real? Or do you have a different conception of how concentrated the the real kind of ability to shape the future is right now?
Yeah, I don't think it's that concentrated. I also don't want it to be that concentrated. I think we've seen over the last couple of days what you have when we've just seen the start of power concentration, and we've sort of seen some of its more unwelcome effects.
Mhm.
I both don't think that it's true that
Mhm.
basically machine learning is now over and all we need to
Mhm.
do is like write the checks. And I also don't want it to be true. So I'm we're going to kind of work to make that not the way things go.
So does that mean you would expect, because I think there's still kind of a synthesis there that I don't mean to suggest that machine learning is over, but the analysis I've come to kind of time and again is like people may invent new techniques that are enough to change the field, change what's possible, accelerate things, maybe make dramatic improvements to the safety profiles. But it seems unlikely that anybody's going to create such a breakthrough that scale isn't still a hugely important factor. And so if you're like, I want to make the world a safer place in 2028, 29, 30 timeframe, it still feels to me like the mechanism still kind of has to route through some sort of hyperscale project. And if it doesn't, I'm not sure how it's going to work. People could, of course, make those contributions from outside through any number of pathways. But if you don't agree with that, then that would maybe imply that you would expect that like perhaps new entrants to the top tier could emerge. And I think that would be like fairly surprising to at least me and probably a lot of people.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think. I mean, this is often like at any given moment, the incumbent looks incredibly dominant until they don't. Like IBM looked like an unstoppable force in computing at some point. Intel was like the dominant, the sole provider almost of computing power. At any point, the big companies have like the advantage of scale. They have many disadvantages, but I think the sort of lesson of history is more that although things look like immediately unstoppable, sometimes, although to be honest, I don't think that many people are really trying. In the end, like it really doesn't work out that way.
So I have a kind of a separate question on, your work seems to reveal that data has a lot of impact on the final shape and, what the model finally does. Is it possible for people outside the labs to influence what the models do by creating data? So both in the sense of data poisoning, or in the sense that if I'm like a middling power, like let's say France, for example, and I decide, you know what, I am going to produce more French corpus and, digitize all of our books which have never been digitized, and record all the conversations that people have day to day, which are not being put into text because we don't have a lot of Reddit culture in France. And what if I prepare all of this corpus and I prepare it for ingestion by the models? Does that end up influencing what the models do from the outside?
I'd say you can try and do it. It seems like, and you probably will have some impact. It seems kind of like giving up. To like, I would be sad if that was the only impact that the rest of the world had. And the reason for that is like, now, not only you basically, you're just sort of hoping, but you're kind of reliant on your influence kind of sneaking past whatever filter Big Labs might put in, and you're reliant on them like not just sort of shaping the model to get rid of it anyway. So I think that they have a lot more control over the models that they create than anyone on the outside. You might you're trying to sneak some stuff in, and it might succeed on the margin, but I don't like that as a future for how AI looks. I'm afraid I'm going to have to drop off to go to a meeting.
Indeed, Tom.
I'm sort of overrunning a bit, but this has been great.
Well, I'm looking forward to next time. I do want to get into, as time permits, the geometry of representations that you guys have been doing some really interesting work on. But we could save that because that's a longer conversation. Yeah. Maybe last thing before you go, are there any Neo Labs or other bets that you're particularly watching that you think could shake the snow globe? If somebody's going to crash the party of the frontier companies, as it has a pretty short guest list today, who or on what with what basis, with what strategy would you expect somebody to crack into that tier?
Obviously, modesty forbids me from saying Goodfire. So it's hard to know, because I'm not very optimistic about the strategy of do the thing that you did. A lot of Neo Labs are like, we used to be at XYZ, we've left, we're gonna found a Neo Lab. And their strategy seems to be basically like, do the thing we were doing at OpenAI, Anthropic, whatever, but with like fewer GPUs and worse distribution. I don't feel very optimistic about that category. I do feel optimistic about people pursuing like different levers that the incumbents have a hard time following. So for instance, like I feel relatively optimistic about continual learning approaches, because that's simply a very hard, that's outside of the operating model of most frontier labs. You have different models per person. The inference footprint is kind of wacky. You have a different kind of, totally different kind of set of guardrailing. You not only need to guardrail the initial model, but the learning process. It's, and that would be very hard. They don't want to adapt to that. So I think if I was looking for an innovator's dilemma anywhere, it would come from either deep breakthroughs or continual learning, because of the innovator's dilemma kind of reason.
Cool. Appreciate the perspective. Thanks for joining us, Tom. Congrats on today's launch, and we'll hope to be talking to you on a semi-regular basis, because I know the publication pace probably isn't going to slow down anytime soon coming out of Goodfire.
Super exponentially.
Yes.
Well, this has been great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Talk soon. Bye for now. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if I'm fully convinced on the prospects of the Neo Labs, but I do agree with the framework that it would have to be some sort of innovator's dilemma. And it feels like it would have to be kind of a big one, because it's obviously a very stylized read of history, and there's plenty of opportunities for caveats and counterexamples and whatever. But it feels to me like usually the category definer doesn't get displaced until kind of the game has changed. IBM didn't lose while it was still a mainframe game. Yeah. And, Google never lost search despite
research, yeah.
many, attempts to do it better or differently or whatever. It was never better enough.
Mhm.
So I do think it will have to be a pretty significant conceptual change. And like, would continual learning be enough for that? And why wouldn't they want to adapt to it? It seems to me like they're pushing that direction with
Yeah.
memory and all that kind of
Exactly.
functionality.
Yeah.
So if all of a sudden somebody bursts onto the scene and they're like, and then of course there's acquisition as another vector by which, these things could be absorbed by the frontier companies. But if somebody suddenly bursts on the scene and they've raised, a couple $1 billion or whatever, and they've got a couple tens of billions of dollars valuation,
Mhm.
and they've got some demonstration of capability from a continual learning standpoint, I guess my bet is on like the ability to sort of reverse engineer, kind of triangulate how exactly is that probably working and get to a close enough approximation
Yeah.
in
I
time to maintain the advantages of scale and distribution. It seems like it's a hard thing to see happening, but
so
never
so
say
I
never, I guess.
I guess what he was alluding to was the difference in the usage pattern of the GPUs, because with the continual learning paradigm, you would have to serve one model per person, and you'd have to keep updating that model over time. And you'd have to run specifically that model, and then that reduces your ability to serve across GPUs and to maximize your kind of GPU throughput, which is what the firms are doing now. They're kind of batching requests and loading into memory, loading out of memory. They can serve you from a different data center if they need to. They can swing capacity. So they're doing a lot of optimizations around the inference because inference costs are high, and they're able to serve to you at that price because they're doing all these optimizations. If you could find a use case for the actual continual learning where you have a single model or a number of models loaded up on a single series of GPUs, and you're not actually switching out of data centers all the time, and you're continually updating those model weights, then you kind of like, you explode that problem for them, and that becomes a very difficult problem for the existing infrastructure and architecture to kind of handle. And so someone purpose building for that business might not be attractive to the existing incumbents. And if it's not attractive to the existing incumbents, then you have a niche that you can grow from. And that, I think that's the idea that he was alluding to.
I could believe that story, but I just feel like we already see LoRa is pretty
Yeah.
scalable.
Yeah.
Now, OpenAI is killing their fine-tuning API.
Yeah.
And one might hypothesize that maybe it's because the GPU operational overhead is not worth it. I would guess it's probably less about that and more about worries about things like emergent misalignment or
Mm.
problematic fine tuning that is hard for them to detect and police. Historically, they have had this LoRa product where
Yeah.
you pay a premium to serve a fine-tuned model, but the rate limits and the availability has been on par with their, and I guess I haven't checked this in a little while, but
Mm.
certainly, a couple of years ago when I was doing a ton of fine tuning,
Yeah.
it was amazing that OpenAI was able to make your fine-tuned model available with the same rate limits as the mainline models.
Yeah.
So I do feel like, how big does that weight space have to be? Where there's some durable representation that transcends sessions, obviously, right? That's kind of one way to define continual learning, I guess. I'm not sure it has to be that big to where the logistics would be so bad. And certainly like LoRa's have shown that it's scalable up to that level. Now, maybe my, everything about Nathan and all of our history might be significantly bigger than a LoRa that I created just to kind of refine, a very small number of tasks in a very small domain. Certainly plausible, but I don't know. I bet they can figure it out. If the value is there, such that it's actually like moving the market against them.
Mm-hmm. We could see that.
I can't imagine that the logistics would be so bad that they wouldn't be able to figure it out and wouldn't be able to kind of charge a bit more for it to make it worth their while.
Let me segue a little bit there with so yesterday or early this morning, Dario put out a blog post, and that blog post is essentially the next steps. It's following on his previous Machines of Loving Grace and other posts, and it's kind of referring that we're getting into the recursive self-alignment, recursive self-improvement paradigm, and that it's time for policy itself to start recursively self-improving in a sense. So he calls it policy on the AI exponential. Let me pull it up here. So he has a policy on the AI exponential, and policy on the AI exponential. And he's kind of taken this view. He starts off with in one of the side plots to Lord of the Rings. We'll skip that piece. But he basically says that if these scaling laws continue for only a year or two longer, we are likely to get what I call the country of geniuses in a data center, in a powerful AI, or a country of geniuses in an AI in a data center. And he says policy, especially legislation, moves very slowly. And he wants a number of things. Number one, regulation and public safety. He thinks there should be a FAA type body that regulates and tests models before release. So that's the first thing that he asked for. The second thing that he asked for is accelerating. The second thing that he asked for is macroeconomic and tax policy. So he feels very strongly that we're going to get massive changes in the economy, including layoffs, and there should be some way to take care of this. Accelerating AI's positive impacts, including access to the healthcare system in order to accelerate progress, and the state and civil liberties, which is the concept of this totalitarian government that can take a look at you and what kind of civil liberties we should have. The main thing that he comes down to is that we should block data brokers from allowing data access. And finally, he has securing leadership by democracies. So these are the 5 planks of the proposal that he's put forward. Nathan, have you had a chance to look at it? What do you think about it? A lot of this is rehashing previous things that they've said, but what do you think of this new kind of proposal?
I'd say my reaction is pretty similar to Machines of Loving Grace in the sense that I think there's a lot to like, and I do appreciate that we are getting something really substantive and detailed here from an AI lab leader. So that's great. I could probably cite, a dozen little specific points that I think are good. Broadly, I think Anthropic has done really well in terms of trying to set a high standard, show that you can deliver excellent product, not necessarily even despite that high standard, but in some ways because of the high standard that they have around understanding, testing, safety profiling. And yet there are a couple big things where I'm like, oh man, notable, either seemingly like problematic or kind of omitted issues. The securing leadership by democracies, I think, it's better. He's taken the edge off a little bit from the original version. This is like a warmer, fuzzier version that's more about upside sharing and more about like trying to entice people to be part of our movement, as opposed to, isolating the bad guys and making them an offer they can't refuse. So I think rhetorically, it's come a long way, and I wish it had kind of started here. Though it does still, I think, especially in light of the earlier document, not really read as a fundamental change in posture. If I were to attempt to, imagine reading this from Beijing, I'm still kind of like, well, Dario basically still sees this as a clash of, if not civilizations, at least like regime types. And he's not going to be willing to work with us unless we have a different regime. And obviously
Mhm.
we are not ready to sign up for that. So I
Mhm,
still
mhm.
think the kind of in general role that this plays in, albeit with subtler language, intensifying the US-China conflict or
Mhm.
rivalry, that hopefully will never become actual hot conflict. I still find that pretty regrettable.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure why he feels like he has to do it all the time. It's a strange, I guess, to try to keep up the support for chip exports, or chip export controls, because there certainly
Um,
has been some waffling on that point. I can see how he would feel like his policy objectives have not been realized in a totally uncomplicated way.
mhm.
But China's also refusing the chips right now, right? So like
Yeah,
maybe just let them be for the time being.
yeah. One of the things that I dislike about these manifestos is that there isn't really anything concrete that he wants to say that he wants to ban or he wants to allow. And one of the things that I found here is that he clearly comes out against the data brokering, which is great. So he has something concrete finally that he wants to disallow. What I don't like about the securing leadership by democracies is in the United Kingdom, you can go to prison for a tweet. Plenty of people, hundreds of people at this point have gone to prison for a tweet. The United Kingdom is one of the oldest democracies, and uh, their their parliament, their elected representatives, have decided that this is going to be something that they do, and so their police officers, who are, the arm of the state, the arm of the electeds, is sending people to prison. Now, when you say securing leadership by democracies, does that mean you are going to entrench the existing power structure in the United Kingdom such that the people cannot push back against this, right? Does that mean that if you have protests in the streets about certain things, including people who are getting taken to prison for tweets, does that mean your police state will be empowered to take them down, to arrest every single person? And that is enough for you because that is securing leadership by democracy, because those are the electeds. Or are you going to say the electeds can't do that? Are you going to say electeds should not throw people into prison for tweets, regardless of what the laws that they have constructed say? Both forks in the both paths are problematic in some sense, and these dilemmas exist across policy and across every single political path that you see. There are these options which are problematic in both senses, and I'm not sure what he means by this. Is Claude going to allow putting people into prison for tweets or not? Because those are our laws. Or is Claude going to say, like, no, on a humanitarian basis, for the alignment as I am aligned to all of humanity, this should not be the case? I don't know. Like, what does this mean, right?
Yeah, I think it means concentration of power is going to be a real big problem. And it is, again, I think there's a pretty good argument for it, at least for now, but it is somewhat ironic, at least, that at the same time we hear this call for shutdown of data brokers and limits to the new possibilities of surveillance. Literally, I think on the same day, or certainly within like no more than 48 hours, they've also introduced a new data retention policy that has them
Yeah.
holding on to
Yeah.
all the user data for 30 days now and basically running some surveillance on that.
Mhm.
I do think they are, right up there with Google in terms of being like best in class in terms of like, what few companies in the world would I be willing to trust my data with? Like in practice, I am sending them a lot of stuff
Yeah.
that in aggregate is like probably quite sensitive.
Mhm.
I'm a pretty simple person, so I don't think I'm like super, blackmailable or anything, but in aggregate, they've certainly got like a, very deep view of me at this point. I trust them enough to like be good stewards of that data. It's certainly as part of the trade for the upside that I get from using Claude models. And I think they do have a pretty good case that like, look, this is a new level of capability. One of the statements that they made that I think should give people empathy for their situation is we expect people to start trying a lot harder to abuse the models now.
Mhm.
I think that was a really, it's kind of just a little line in the blog post somewhere, but it made me think, yeah, that's a great point. With the increased power of the model, there's much more reason to try to
Mhm.
do all kinds of different things with it. And so
Mhm.
they have to plan for not just more of the same behavior that they've been seeing, but a whole new level of sophistication in terms of attempts to get around their systems.
Yeah.
And so, sure, it makes sense that they would want to have a look at that data, at kind of an aggregate level with some benefit of hindsight. And, I don't doubt that they're going to find some stuff. I would kind of be surprised if they don't. So the reason to do it is apt, but it is kind of, and of course, nobody has to use Anthropic. It is a very different dynamic contract that we have as users of Anthropic. We could easily switch. We don't have a perfect substitute. I think it's my experience with like GPT 5.5 on OpenClaw recently has been. It is not an immediate substitute for me. I'm like
Mhm.
definitely still finding clear surplus value in Claude. So
Mhm.
it's not easy to switch, or it's not costless to switch, but we can switch. We can't do that with the government, obviously. So I think that point is like very well taken. Um, but somebody said to me yesterday that they were mad at Anthropic, and it was actually somebody who was like maybe going to do a podcast episode with me. But I have an Anthropic sponsorship running, and they were like, I don't know if I want to do anything. I'm mad at them. I don't want to do anything that's affiliated with them. And I was like, like it or not, there's going to be a lot more Anthropic in your future.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not to the level of government yet, and it may never get quite to that level, but it is not going to be something that you are going to be able to. You could boycott products, but even
Mhm.
then, there's going to be enough power, there's going to be enough influence. Everybody else is going to be using it. You're going to be, the government itself is going to be using it. You're going to be living in a world that is heavily Anthropic and Claude infused,
Mhm.
even if you go into a total consumer boycott. So I basically said to this person, don't let a little sort of second, bank shot like association with Anthropic control what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Because you would basically have to never leave your room, I'm afraid,
Yeah.
before too long if you want to stay, totally free of those kinds of associations.
Indeed.
One other thing I do think is also worth highlighting, especially from the hardcore AI safety community that was
Mhm.
missing from this, internal deployments and recursive self-improvement itself aren't
Mhm.
really mentioned here, right? We're talking about all the regulation stuff was pre-deployment review. The government should be able to, they used an interesting mix of language. It was like deny or like deter, deployment. Um, it didn't seem like they were necessarily going quite as far as saying they should have a simple like yes no decision point that would be binding, but they certainly want them to have some say in the process. But a lot of people would say the most dangerous models are going to be the ones that are deployed internally, that maybe have a different constitution than the one that is deployed externally, that
Yeah.
might make it more willing to do certain things, or might
Mhm.
make it just less vetted broadly than the public models. And
Mm.
these are the ones that are going to be training their successors
Yeah.
much more than the public facing ones. So I think most of the policy making public isn't thinking about, or policy interested public or policy making class is not thinking too much about that yet. But in the circles I sometimes run in, that was like, well, wait, you didn't say anything about internal deployments. You didn't say anything about governing recursive self-improvement. The only thing that really stood out to me as kind of capturing those dynamics were the requirement to support to report safety incidents. They did have a bit on companies being required to, I think, promptly report safety incidents. So that would presumably apply even to internal deployments.
Mhm.
Um,
So
but
so the
that's really just scratching the surface on how to handle those situations.
I think he's come out and said frontier AI models like airplanes should be required to go through technical testing and auditing, and the release should be blocked or reversed as a threat to public safety if they do not meet high standards of safety. And he says this is a escalation of previously they were only supporting transparency, and now they're supporting audits and pre-release audits and testing. I think one of the things that struck me was that in their safety testing and the model cards, they often say that they have an internal, helpful, honest model, with not a fully helpful, harmless, honest and harmless model. So they have a model that can do harm. I often wonder if the models used by the Department of War, the Palantir models, are actually the helpful, honest models, and without the harmless tag attached to it, or whether the government as a client has requested those models, because certainly the government is using, the NSA is using it for hacking China. That was, that news was out about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So I do wonder whether there are already versions of the model which are used for internal use, which have very different set of safeguards attached to them.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why it gets so scary for those that are inclined to be scared about things like this, because the internal models are always going to be more powerful, less tested, and probably less guardrailed at the same time. So and again, they're going to be the ones, that are primarily responsible for training their successors. So I think that, again, we talked, I think last week a little bit about the different constitutions that they might use to train these internal RSI focused models. We could maybe hope that those constitutions are in some ways more guardrailed. So it may not be strictly true to say that they're less guardrailed. It will probably be maybe differently guardrailed, and maybe they can get that right. Obviously, they're not going to have their no helping with ML research guardrail on their internal model. Like definitionally, they're not going to do that. But you could imagine a different balance of harmlessness training for the Claude that trains its successor that might even be turned up. You might think, you could imagine that, they want it to help they want public Claude to help with cigarette company business plans, even though we know that in fact, they refuse more often than they help, despite their creators' intentions. But there is a balance on that they're trying to strike, where it's like, yeah, you might do a little bit of harm, you might be taking some risk, but you got to do stuff in the world to be helpful. And the cost of refusing to help is also quite high, right? That's like a big part of the Constitution. You could imagine, you could hope that they would have a different Constitution internally that in some ways is more permissive, but in other ways might be more conservative, and really try to, because you don't, you maybe don't want it to, take risks in the same way when the stakes are super high on an internal RSI loop versus, just helping random users with stuff that, might not be best for society, but is ultimately something we are already living with. So, yeah, I mean, this is the kind of disclosure, Let's see how committed to transparency they are. Will we see the constitution for the internal Claude that is taking the lead on the RSI loop? Like, that's not committed here. So much of this language revolves around deployment or
Yeah.
release, even. Guys, deployment, they might think is could catch up with internal deployment. This seems to be very clearly structured around language of release to the public, not what they can do internally. So,
And
we
it
got
must-
to.
the largest user of tokens of Claude are Anthropic themselves. So that is the largest use case by far, I think. So,
Yeah. It's going to be interesting, for me. How do I want to land on, like, what is my role or, duty to critique Anthropic? I think as we've talked through the current state of affairs over the last couple of weeks, I keep coming back to, it seems like most of the ability to shape the future is concentrated in a few places. Obviously, not everybody agrees with that. But given that feeling, what is my duty, and how should I think about my obligation to, like, be consistent in terms of calling things out if I don't like them, or continuing to harp on some of these old points. I've certainly made some of these points plenty of times previously, but I do feel like there's a certain duty to kind of stay at it. It's it's kind of most of what I feel like we can do right now is probably through shaping how the frontier companies
exactly.
act,
Exactly.
and
So
can't phone it in on that dimension.
And to note, Anthropic is not averse to criticism, right? They want the feedback from the public. They want the feedback from the ecosystem. They want to figure this out together, right? They're very, very strongly, they don't feel that this is something that they should be doing alone, and that they want that feedback. And I think, to the extent that we can give, criticism which is not ad hominem and which is kind of targeted at the things that should be improved, I think that is actually very constructive. And I think they should view that very positively, because the worst thing that can happen to your product is no one pays attention to it. Right?
No danger of that for now.
No danger of that. So
I feel both ways on that. So on the Cognitive Revolution, we have Anthropic as a sponsor, and I am very confident that good faith criticism of Anthropic would not put my business relationship with them at risk.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I feel like, yes, I think I expect them to have a very high ethical standard where they're not going to, try to get back at me if I say something that's not flattering, unless I'm like, maybe really going extreme in an ad hominem direction, which isn't really my style.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried about that really at all. At the same time, I'm not so sure. Like, they do put a lot of things out that sort of say we need a whole of society conversation.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, I do feel like there's a certain insularity and kind of closed ranks at times from Anthropic people. The other day, I forget who we were talking to when I said, when you talk to Anthropic people, it's almost like they can't imagine anything other than recursive self-improvement. So I do feel there are some beliefs that have become so uniform within Anthropic that I don't know that they are necessarily being actively questioned in the way that I might hope. I think this China one is probably a pretty good example of that. Dario's been on that for a long time. I have criticized him online for that in the past. That notably has not led to any any downstream effect on my formal business relationship with Anthropic. So that's good. But I don't know that internally the debate is quite as robust as I would like it to be. You could, just think about how few leaks there are. I
Yeah.
think that is a really interesting metric of kind of how aligned the organization is. And it's clearly doing a lot for them in terms of efficacy. They are really executing, obviously, at an extremely high level and winning, just about everywhere they're going.
So I have spoken to people who have interviewed at Anthropic and looked at the structure. And one of the things that the founders did from the beginning was that they siloed a bunch of stuff off, because Dario's belief is that sometimes these 2 or 3 lines of code could be an enormous secret on its own. So they've done a lot more siloing. So I think parts of the organization, they've built an organization that is less able to look at the big picture in that sense, because people have their own pieces, and then Dario has and the founders have this kind of broad overview, and you kind of have to trust that the founders as a whole have that broad overview, but you're not party to a lot of the other discussions, and that is part of the deal when you join. And I've heard people who have turned down offers from them because of that reason, because there are some coders and some researchers who want to have that broad overview of everything that's going on in the organization, and that's basically something which is not, which their structure does not allow, basically. So it's a different kind of beast from the Jensen Huang 40 people reporting to Jensen, and everyone hears everything kind of viewpoint. So.
Well, is that where we should leave it today? Tomorrow we've got another session with a couple of pretty interesting guests. One that I'm really excited about is, hopefully I'm saying his pseudonym correctly, Prinz.
He is a
pseudonymous,
legal brain. Yeah.
Yeah, and a very close watcher of the frontier companies. So when we get on with him, I'm really going to be looking for, what are the little tidbits that you notice that you think are flying under the radar? This is something I take a certain amount of pride in, but I've noticed he's an excellent source for this attention to detail. And, one who continues to remind everybody of things like OpenAI has a, explicit timeline for when they're going to have the, fully autonomous AI R&D researcher. And it's funny how that stuff, those of us that do watch closely do need to continue to remind people about that. So I really appreciate that from this Prinz account. And we're not going to reveal their identity, but we're going to have a really...
It's our first anonymous, anonymous guest. So
yeah, that's cool. I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to touch on before we break for today?
No, I think that, this week is kind of a digestion week. I think. I hope next week we can get Zui or someone else who has looked at the Fable issues a little bit more closely, because it's the first I think leap forward since like late last year. So I'm looking forward to kind of more comprehensive opinions and views on it. So
we're going to be making sense of this in real time from here until the singularity.
Indeed. Nathan, till tomorrow.
Thanks, Prakash. See you tomorrow.
Cheers.